Jonathan Hartley was not just any man. He was the kind of person people whispered about at dinner parties. With a sharp suit that always seemed freshly pressed and a Rolex glinting on his wrist, he carried himself like someone who had conquered the world. And in many ways he had. Born into modest circumstances, Jonathan worked tirelessly to build his empire. By the time he hit his mid-40s, he owned a tech company worth millions, lived in a mansion with marble floors, and drove cars most people could only dream of. To the outside world, Jonathan was living the ultimate success story. But behind the polished exterior lay a complicated life. At the heart of it all was Evelyn, his wife of nearly 2 decades. She wasn't flashy or extravagant like some of the women Jonathan encountered at business events. Instead, Evelyn was steady, nurturing, and endlessly supportive. They'd met during their college years when both were wide-eyed and full of dreams. Back then, Jonathan wasn't the millionaire everyone admired. He was just a scrappy young man with big ideas and an even bigger work ethic. Evelyn believed in him when no one else did, cheering him on through late nights and early mornings as he built his career from the ground up. For years, their partnership thrived. Evelyn managed their home, while Jonathan focused on expanding his business. Together, they created a life filled with laughter, shared goals, and quiet moments of contentment. But as Jonathan's wealth grew, so did the distance between them. The long hours at work turned into missed dinners, anniversaries forgotten, and conversations reduced to quick updates before bed. Evelyn tried to bridge the gap, suggesting date nights or weekend getaways. But Jonathan always found an excuse, another meeting, another deal to close. The truth was, Jonathan's ego had grown alongside his bank account. He began to see himself as invincible, untouchable. Surrounded by admirers and sycophants, he started craving something, or someone, new. His eyes wandered at social gatherings, lingering on younger women who laughed loudly and wore designer dresses. Evelyn noticed, of course. How could she not? But instead of confronting him, she hoped it was just a phase, a temporary lapse in judgment. After all, hadn't they been through everything together? Still, cracks began to form in their once solid foundation. Jonathan stopped confiding in Evelyn, treating her more like an employee than a partner. He dismissed her concerns with vague promises to do better, but never followed through. Meanwhile, Evelyn felt invisible, as though the man she loved had slowly slipped away, replaced by someone she barely recognized. Friends urged her to leave, warning her that Jonathan might stray completely if she didn't act soon. But Evelyn held on, clinging to the hope that the man she married still existed somewhere beneath the surface. Little did either of them know, fate was about to intervene in a way neither could have predicted. What happened next would change their lives forever, and force Jonathan to confront the consequences of his choices. It was a crisp autumn evening when Jonathan's life took an unexpected turn. The city's annual charity gala was in full swing, and the grand ballroom buzzed with the clinking of champagne glasses and polite laughter. Jonathan stood near the bar, dressed impeccably in a tailored tuxedo, his presence commanding attention as always. He scanned the room, nodding at familiar faces while sipping his drink. But then, something, or rather, someone, caught his eye. Across the room stood Camilla, a woman whose beauty seemed almost otherworldly. She was younger than Jonathan, perhaps in her late 20s, with striking green eyes and a confident smile that lit up the room. Her sleek black dress hugged her figure perfectly, and she moved with an effortless grace that drew people toward her like moths to a flame. Jonathan couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about her, something intoxicating that he hadn't felt in years. Their paths crossed later that night during the auction segment of the event. Camilla happened to bid on the same painting Jonathan had set his sights on, a bold, abstract piece that reminded him of his early days in business when risks paid off handsomely. When the gavel finally fell, it was Camilla who won the bid. Jonathan approached her afterward, feigning disappointment but secretly thrilled to have an excuse to strike up a conversation. "You've got excellent taste," he said smoothly, flashing his most charming smile. though I must admit, I'm a little disappointed you outbid me." Camilla laughed lightly, tilting her head as if intrigued by his confidence. "Well, maybe next time you'll be quicker on the draw," she teased, her voice carrying just the right mix of playfulness and allure. They talked for what felt like hours, discussing everything from art to travel to their shared love of fine dining. By the end of the night, Jonathan realized he didn't want the conversation to end. Over the following weeks, Jonathan found himself thinking about Camilla constantly. He began attending events where he knew she'd be present, making excuses to bump into her. At first, Evelyn noticed nothing unusual. After all, Jonathan often mingled with clients and associates at such gatherings. But as his interactions with Camilla grew more frequent, subtle changes crept into their marriage. He started coming home later, claiming work kept him busy. Phone calls went unanswered, and weekends once reserved for family outings were now spent catching up on emails or meetings. Evelyn tried to ignore the signs, convincing herself that Jonathan was simply stressed from work. Yet deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Evelyn broached the subject gently. "You've been distant lately," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Is everything okay?" Jonathan hesitated, caught off guard by her question. For a moment, guilt flickered across his face, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive chuckle. "Of course, everything's fine," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "Just a lot on my plate right now." But the truth was far more complicated. Camilla had awakened something in Jonathan, a longing for excitement, novelty, and validation. She made him feel desirable again, like the powerful man everyone admired. With Evelyn, life had become predictable, safe. With Camilla, every moment felt electric, unpredictable. And though part of him knew he was playing with fire, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. As weeks turned into months, Jonathan's infatuation with Camilla only deepened. He convinced himself that this new connection was what he needed to reignite his passion for life. What he failed to see, however, was the toll it was taking on those around him, and the storm brewing on the horizon. The day Jonathan finally left Evelyn, the air in their home felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no raised voices or slammed doors. Instead, it was a quiet, suffocating conversation that unfolded in their living room late one evening. Evelyn sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly together, while Jonathan stood by the fireplace, unable to meet her eyes. "I can't keep pretending anymore," he said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't working, for either of us." Evelyn's heart sank, though part of her had seen this coming. She nodded slowly, trying to maintain her composure. "Is it her?" she asked softly, already knowing the answer. Jonathan hesitated, guilt flickering across his face before he pushed it aside. "Camilla makes me feel alive again," he admitted. "I need this, Evelyn. I need to start over." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Her mind raced with memories of their life together. The laughter, the struggles, the dreams they'd once shared. How could it all just vanish so easily? But instead of pleading or arguing, she simply stood up, her dignity intact. "If that's what you truly want," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest, "then I won't stand in your way." And just like that, it was over. Evelyn packed only a few essentials, a suitcase of clothes, some photographs, and a small box of mementos, and left the house they had built together. Jonathan watched her go, a strange mix of relief and unease settling over him. He told himself this was the right decision, that he deserved happiness too. Yet, deep down, he couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that he was walking away from something irreplaceable. Life with Camilla began like a whirlwind romance plucked straight out of a movie. They traveled the world, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants and staying in luxurious hotels. Camilla introduced Jonathan to a lifestyle filled with glitz and glamour, where every day felt like a celebration. For a while, He basked in the attention, reveling in the excitement of being with someone who seemed to adore him. But as time went on, cracks began to show beneath the surface. Camilla was fun and vivacious, but she also had a temper that flared unexpectedly. Small disagreements about finances or plans for the future often escalated into heated arguments. Jonathan quickly realized that Camilla viewed their relationship through a different lens, one focused more on material wealth than emotional connection. She admired his success, yes, but she didn't seem interested in understanding the man behind the money. One particularly tense evening, after yet another argument about overspending, Jonathan found himself staring out the window of their penthouse apartment. The city lights twinkled below, but the view offered little comfort. He thought back to his life with Evelyn, the quiet evenings spent talking about their day, the warmth of her presence beside him. Those moments had been simple, even mundane, but they had been real. With Camilla, everything felt performative, as if they were playing roles in a story neither of them fully believed in. Despite these growing doubts, Jonathan clung to the hope that starting a family would fix things. He imagined raising children with Camilla, creating a new chapter filled with joy and purpose. Perhaps, he reasoned, parenthood would bring them closer together, bridging the gaps between their personalities and priorities. So when Camilla announced one morning that she wanted to try for a baby, Jonathan felt a surge of optimism. This, he thought, was the fresh start they both needed. But fate has a way of surprising us, and what came next would challenge everything Jonathan thought he knew about love, responsibility, and the choices that shape our lives. As the months passed, Jonathan began to realize that building a family wouldn't magically erase the flaws in their relationship. In fact, it might expose them in ways he hadn't anticipated. And yet there was no turning back now. The wheels of destiny were already in motion. The news came on a chilly winter morning, delivered with an almost surreal calmness. Camilla sat at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, as she glanced up at Jonathan with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "We're having quadruplets," she said, her voice trembling slightly. For a moment, Jonathan thought he'd misheard her. "Quadruplets," he repeated, his mind struggling to process the word. "As in, 4 babies." Camilla nodded, her lips curling into a nervous smile. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. It's rare, but it happens." Jonathan sank into the chair opposite her, his thoughts spinning wildly. He had imagined becoming a father again, perhaps even raising 2 or 3 children. But 4? At once? The idea was overwhelming, almost incomprehensible. Yet, beneath the shock, a flicker of joy began to grow. Maybe this was exactly what their relationship needed, a chance to bond over something bigger than themselves. Over the next several months, life became a whirlwind of preparations. Jonathan threw himself into transforming their penthouse apartment into a nursery fit for royalty. Cribs, strollers, bottles, and endless stacks of tiny clothes filled every corner. Friends and acquaintances marveled at the couple's good fortune, though some couldn't help but whisper behind closed doors about how such a lavish lifestyle might handle the chaos of 4 newborns. When the big day finally arrived, Jonathan paced anxiously outside the delivery room, his heart pounding with anticipation. Hours later, the nurse emerged with a broad smile. "Would you like to meet your family?" she asked, leading him inside. There they were, 4 perfect little faces, each one more miraculous than the last. 3 boys and a girl, all healthy and safe. Tears welled up in Jonathan's eyes as he gazed at them, feeling a surge of love so powerful it took his breath away. At first, parenthood seemed like a dream come true. Jonathan reveled in the late-night feedings, the diaper changes, and the coos of his babies as they drifted off to sleep. But reality soon set in. Raising quadruplets was no easy feat. Sleep became a distant memory, and the constant demands left both Jonathan and Camilla exhausted. Arguments flared more frequently now, often sparked by trivial matters like whose turn it was to soothe a crying baby, or who forgot to restock formula. Amid the chaos, however, something strange began to catch Jonathan's attention. As the children grew older, subtle similarities between them and him started to emerge, not just in appearance, but in mannerisms too. The way the oldest boy tilted his head when deep in thought mirrored Jonathan's own habit during meetings. The youngest girl's mischievous grin reminded him of the playful smirk he used to flash in his younger days. Even the twins' tendency to finish each other's sentences echoed his knack for anticipating people's words. It wasn't just one or two traits, it was everywhere. Every glance in their direction felt like looking into a mirror that reflected pieces of himself. At first, Jonathan dismissed it as mere coincidence. After all, genetics worked in mysterious ways. But the resemblance was uncanny, almost eerie, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. One evening, as he tucked the children into bed, Jonathan found himself staring at their peaceful faces, lost in thought. Was it possible that these four tiny humans were trying to tell him something? Or was he simply reading too much into things, searching for meaning where none existed? Whatever the reason, the weight of their likeness lingered in his mind long after the lights were turned off. As the days passed, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that these children were connected to him in ways he didn't fully understand. They weren't just reminders of his decision to start anew with Camilla. They were also reflections of his past, present, and perhaps even his future. And while he still struggled to find balance in his chaotic new life, one thing was certain: the arrival of the quadruplets had changed everything. And nothing would ever be the same again. As the years rolled on, Jonathan's life became a patchwork of highs and lows. The quadruplets, Ethan, Liam, Noah, and little Sophie, grew into energetic toddlers who filled the house with laughter, toys, and occasional tantrums. On paper, Jonathan had everything he'd ever wanted: a beautiful family, a luxurious home, and enough wealth to ensure they never wanted for anything. But beneath the surface, cracks were widening in ways he couldn't ignore. Camilla, once the dazzling woman who had swept him off his feet, now seemed like a stranger living under the same roof. Her patience wore thin as the demands of raising four children took their toll. She resented the late nights, the endless laundry, and the way her social life had dwindled to non-existent. Jonathan, too, felt stretched thin, juggling work responsibilities with parenting duties. Their arguments grew sharper, more frequent, often erupting over trivial matters like whose turn it was to clean up spilled milk or why one of them hadn't attended a school event. But what troubled Jonathan most was how distant Camilla seemed from the children. To her, they were adorable accessories, a testament to her ability to create the perfect family. But she rarely engaged with them beyond superficial interactions. She left bedtime stories and playtime to nannies, preferring to retreat to her spa appointments or shopping sprees. Jonathan tried to fill the gap, reading books to the kids and teaching them simple games, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing. Meanwhile, Jonathan's once thriving business began to falter. His focus had shifted so drastically toward his personal life that he neglected key decisions at work. Competitors seized opportunities he overlooked, and profits started slipping. For the first time in decades, Jonathan faced the reality that his empire wasn't invincible. The stress weighed heavily on him, adding another layer of tension to an already strained household. One evening, after yet another exhausting day, Jonathan found himself scrolling through social media while sitting alone in his study. A notification popped up, a photo shared by someone he vaguely recognized from college. Curious, he clicked on it and froze. There she was, Evelyn, smiling warmly alongside a man he didn't recognize. They stood side by side at what looked like a community event, her arm looped casually around his. The caption read, "Celebrating kindness with my amazing husband, Henry." The image hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. Evelyn looked radiant, happier than he'd seen her in years. Her eyes sparkled with contentment, and her smile radiated genuine joy. Beside her, Henry appeared kind and unassuming, the kind of man who probably spent weekends gardening or volunteering at local shelters. It was a stark contrast to the opulence Jonathan surrounded himself with, and somehow It made Evelyn seem even more beautiful. For hours, Jonathan stared at the screen, scrolling through Evelyn's profile. He saw pictures of her working at a soup kitchen, organizing charity drives, and spending time outdoors with Henry. Each image painted a picture of a life filled with purpose and fulfillment. Everything Jonathan's current existence lacked. Guilt gnawed at him as memories flooded back. Evelyn's unwavering support during his early struggles, her quiet sacrifices, her belief in him when no one else did. How could he have thrown all of that away? The next morning, Jonathan woke up with a heavy heart. As he watched the quadruplets play in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the air, he realized how much he missed having someone like Evelyn by his side. Someone who truly understood him, flaws and all. Someone who valued love and connection over material wealth. That afternoon, he decided to reach out, not because he expected anything in return, but because he needed closure. He sent Evelyn a brief message, asking if they could meet for coffee sometime. To his surprise, she replied within minutes, agreeing to see him. Though her tone was polite and reserved, there was a hint of curiosity in her words. As the days passed leading up to their meeting, Jonathan wrestled with conflicting emotions. Would Evelyn forgive him? Could they ever rebuild any semblance of trust? Or had he burned that bridge forever? One thing was certain. This encounter would force him to confront not only Evelyn, but also the choices that had led him here. Whatever happened next, Jonathan knew, would change the course of his life once again. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jonathan found himself unusually nervous. He had spent hours deciding what to wear, opting for something simple yet presentable, a dark blazer over a crisp white shirt. As he drove to the small cafe Evelyn had suggested, his mind raced with questions. What would she say? How would she look at him? Would she even recognize the man he used to be? When he walked into the cozy cafe, Evelyn was already there, seated by the window. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm but guarded. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the years between them hanging heavy in the air. Then Evelyn broke the silence with a soft smile. "Jonathan," she said, her voice steady. "It's been a long time." "It has," he replied, taking the seat across from her. Up close, he noticed the subtle changes in her appearance. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver, and faint lines framed her eyes. But those same eyes still held the warmth and kindness he remembered so vividly. It struck him how effortlessly she carried herself, exuding a quiet confidence that came from living a life true to her values. They began talking cautiously, exchanging pleasantries about work, hobbies, and mutual acquaintances. Evelyn mentioned her volunteer work at the shelter, describing how fulfilling it felt to help others. Jonathan listened intently, marveling at how much she seemed to have grown since their separation. She spoke with passion and purpose, qualities he realized he had taken for granted during their marriage. At one point, Evelyn turned the conversation back to him. "How are the kids?" she asked gently, her tone free of judgment. "They're amazing," Jonathan admitted, his voice softening. "Ethan, Liam, Noah, and Sophie. They keep me on my toes. They're smart, funny, and full of energy." He hesitated before adding, "They remind me of myself sometimes, in ways I didn't expect." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. "That must be rewarding," she said, "being a father again." "It is," Jonathan replied, though his words carried a tinge of sadness. "But it's also complicated. Raising 4 children isn't easy, especially when—" He trailed off, unsure how much to reveal about his strained relationship with Camilla. Evelyn didn't press him. Instead, she changed the subject slightly, sharing anecdotes about Henry and their life together. From the way she spoke, it was clear she adored him. His patience, his humor, his unwavering support. Jonathan felt a pang of envy mixed with admiration. Henry sounded like everything Jonathan wished he could be. Grounded, dependable, and genuinely happy. As the conversation flowed, Jonathan found himself opening up more than he intended. He confessed how lonely he'd felt these past few years, how disconnected he was from Camilla, and how much he regretted letting pride and ambition cloud his judgment. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Jonathan," she said softly, "I won't lie and say I wasn't hurt when you left. Because I was. Deeply. But over time, I learned to forgive. Not just you, but myself too. We both made mistakes." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. Jonathan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her forgiveness and the responsibility it carried. "Thank you for saying that," he murmured. "I don't deserve it, but I needed to hear it." Evelyn smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mix of compassion and resolve. "Maybe this is your chance to figure out what really matters," she said. "Not just for you, but for those kids of yours. They need someone who can give them stability and love. Not perfection, just presence." The comment hit home harder than Jonathan expected. He realized Evelyn wasn't just offering advice. She was giving him permission to start over, to be better, not just for himself but for his children. Before they parted ways, Evelyn handed him a business card with her office address. "If you ever want to talk again," she said warmly, "my door's always open." As Jonathan watched her walk away, he felt a strange mixture of relief and determination. This meeting hadn't erased the past, but it had given him something unexpected: hope. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that change was possible, if he was willing to fight for it. In the days following his meeting with Evelyn, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Her words echoed in his mind, especially her gentle reminder that the children needed stability and love, not perfection, but presence. It was as if she had peeled back a layer of denial he'd been hiding behind for years, forcing him to confront the emptiness in his life. For the first time, he began to see his choices not just as decisions that affected him, but as actions that shaped the lives of those around him, especially his children. Determined to make sense of everything, Jonathan decided to visit Evelyn's office, just as she had invited him to do. The building where she worked was modest compared to the skyscrapers he was accustomed to, yet it radiated warmth and purpose. Inside, posters promoting community initiatives lined the walls, and the hum of productivity filled the air. When Evelyn greeted him at the door, her smile was kind but professional, signaling that this wasn't a social call. It was an opportunity for honesty. They sat across from each other in her small but welcoming office, surrounded by shelves stacked with books and files related to her work. After some light chatter, Jonathan finally broached the topic weighing heavily on his heart. "Evelyn," he began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've never told anyone." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her expression attentive. "Go ahead," she encouraged softly. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan revealed a secret that had haunted him since their divorce. "After we separated, you were pregnant, weren't you?" The room fell silent. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she looked as though she might cry. Then, composing herself, she nodded slowly. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found out shortly after you left. But," she paused, swallowing hard, "I lost the baby." Jonathan felt as though the ground beneath him had crumbled. The weight of her words hit him like a tidal wave, leaving him speechless. He had always assumed that their separation marked the end of their shared future, but now he realized how much more they had both lost. A child. A piece of them both. The thought was unbearable. "I'm so sorry," he managed to choke out, his voice trembling. "If I had known, if I hadn't walked away." Evelyn shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's not your fault, Jonathan. Not entirely. We were both struggling back then, you with your ambitions, me with my pain. But losing that baby, it broke me in ways I didn't think I could recover from." She paused, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Henry helped me heal. He taught me that life goes on, even when it feels impossible. And eventually, I learned to forgive. Not just you, but myself too. Her vulnerability struck a chord deep within Jonathan. He realized how selfish he had been, chasing fleeting desires while ignoring the people who truly mattered. Evelyn had endured unimaginable loss alone, without the support she deserved, because he hadn't been there for her. The guilt threatened to consume him, but Evelyn's steady gaze reminded him that dwelling on the past wouldn't change anything. "You're stronger than I ever was," Jonathan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "And wiser. I wish I could turn back time and do things differently. But I can't. All I can do is try to be better, for my kids, for myself, and maybe, someday, for you." Evelyn studied him for a long moment before responding. "You don't owe me anything, Jonathan. What's done is done. But if you're serious about changing, start small. Be present for your children. Show them what real love looks like, not through gifts or grand gestures, but through consistency and care." Her advice resonated deeply with him. As they wrapped up their meeting, Evelyn handed him a pamphlet about parenting workshops she occasionally facilitated. "These might help," she said with a faint smile. "Sometimes, hearing perspectives outside our own can make all the difference." Driving home, Jonathan replayed their conversation in his mind. Though the revelation about the miscarriage had shattered him, it also clarified what he needed to do next. He couldn't undo the mistakes of his past, but he could shape the future. For his children, for himself, and perhaps in some small way for Evelyn too. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. Change wouldn't come easily, but he was ready to try. In the weeks that followed his second meeting with Evelyn, Jonathan began to take small but deliberate steps toward change. He started by spending more time with the Quadruplets, carving out moments in his busy schedule to be fully present with them. Instead of delegating bedtime stories to nannies, he read to them himself, savoring their giggles and wide-eyed wonder as they listened to tales of adventure and magic. On weekends, he took them to the park, teaching them how to fly kites or kick a soccer ball, laughing alongside them as they stumbled and tried again. At first, Camilla barely noticed, or perhaps she didn't care. Her focus remained on her own pursuits, shopping sprees, yoga classes, and lunches with friends. But as Jonathan grew more involved in the children's lives, cracks began to form in their already strained relationship. One evening, after returning home from a family outing, Camilla confronted him in the kitchen. "What's gotten into you lately?" she demanded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You're acting like some kind of suburban dad. This isn't who you are, Jonathan." He met her gaze steadily, surprising even himself with the clarity of his response. "Maybe it is who I am now," he said quietly, "or at least who I want to be." Camilla scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You think playing house is going to fix everything. Newsflash, it won't. These kids need stability, sure, but they also need parents who actually get along. And let's face it, we haven't been doing that for a long time." Her words stung, but Jonathan couldn't deny their truth. Their marriage had become little more than an arrangement, held together by convenience and appearances. After a tense silence, he finally spoke. "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending," he said, his voice firm despite the knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. "For the sake of the kids, if nothing else." The conversation ended without resolution, but it marked a turning point. Over the next few months, Jonathan and Camilla began discussing the possibility of separating, a decision neither entered into lightly. Though painful, it felt like the right choice for everyone involved. The Quadruplets adjusted slowly, finding comfort in Jonathan's newfound presence and the love of extended family members who stepped in to support them. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued reaching out to Evelyn, not as a romantic interest, but as someone whose wisdom and perspective he deeply respected. They met occasionally for coffee or lunch, conversations flowing easily between reflections on parenting, work, and life. Evelyn never pushed him to reveal more than he was ready to share, but her quiet encouragement gave him strength during moments of doubt. One afternoon, as they sat together at a quiet cafe, Jonathan broached a question that had lingered in his mind for months. Do you think forgiveness is enough to rebuild trust? He asked hesitantly, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Evelyn considered his question carefully before responding. Forgiveness is a start, she said thoughtfully. But trust takes time and effort. It's about showing up consistently, proving through actions that you've changed. Not just to me, but to yourself. Her words stayed with him long after their meeting ended. Jonathan realized that while Evelyn's forgiveness had given him hope, earning back her trust, if that was even possible, would require patience and persistence. For now, though, he was content simply knowing she believed in his potential to grow. As the years passed, Jonathan embraced his role as a father with renewed dedication. He learned to cherish the little things. The sound of Sophie's laughter, the way Ethan furrowed his brow when concentrating on homework, the endless questions Lamb and Noah peppered him with during car rides. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be. But it was meaningful in ways he hadn't appreciated before. Whether his connection with Evelyn would evolve beyond friendship remained uncertain. What mattered most was that he had begun to heal, not just for himself, but for the people who depended on him. And though the road ahead promised challenges, Jonathan faced it with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in decades. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that redemption, however imperfect, was within reach.